The LSAT is no longer a predictable exam. Last week, LSAC quietly removed the comparative reading comprehension passage for some test takers without announcing it in advance. And they have now confirmed that going forward, you will not know ahead of time whether your LSAT reading comp section will have comparative reading or not. Of course, you will get the same score out of 180, reading comp will have the same weight, and technically the LSAT is considered the same exam, and LSAC is deliberately introducing this uncertainty. And so if you are preparing for the LSAT in 2026 and beyond, you need to understand exactly what's changing and how to respond, or you're giving up points before the test even starts. And so today, I'm going to walk you through 5 major shifts happening on the LSAT right now, and more importantly, what you need to do about each one if your goal is a top score, a top law school, and real scholarship leverage. And unfortunately, none of these changes were rolled out gently. None of them came with much, if any, warning. And if you're relying on what the LSAT looked like even 2 or 3 years ago, you are already behind. Now, let's talk a bit about what January LSAT test takers experienced. They sat down for the LSAT, opened up reading comprehension, and they did what everybody does, that quick structural scan before they began reading. And then they noticed, of course, there was no comparative passage. No passage A, no passage B, no paired or dual set, just 4 single passages. And instantly, a lot of them, their brains jumped to the same conclusion a lot of people had, that something must be wrong with the test. This must be the unscored experimental section, or maybe there was a glitch. But nothing was wrong. And since then, after the fact, LSAC has now confirmed this is how reading comprehension will work going forward. Some scored sections will include a comparative passage and some won't, and you will not know which one you're getting in advance. So the first big shift on the LSAT in 2026 is that reading comprehension is no longer predictable. For years, ever since June 2007, students were trained to expect one dual comparative passage in reading comp. They might have mentally braced for it or budgeted extra time for it. And so, for those test takers, their brains learned a pattern. And unfortunately, when that pattern disappeared, a lot of people weren't able to adjust. They hesitated and searched for something that unfortunately wasn't there. And all that happened before they even answered a single question. And so that is the real trap. The LSAT doesn't punish you for not knowing what's coming because, of course, they're always looking to change things up, but they will punish you for hesitating once the clock is running. And so here's what you should do instead. On test day, your scan of the section should take only a couple of seconds, and you should not be expending any emotional energy during that scan. You should just be looking to answer one simple question. Do you have a comparative or dual passage, or do you just have 4 single passages? Because ultimately, your actual job on reading comp never really changes. You're always answering the questions: what is the author doing? How is the passage structured? Which viewpoints actually matter? And of course, where does the author stand? What is their opinion? If they could leave you with only one central idea, what would that idea be? Those questions apply every single passage, regardless of the format. Now, the good news is that counterintuitively, for many students, 4 single passages are actually easier because the comparative passages, they add moving parts, they increase your cognitive load, and they kind of slow people down. And so if these passages used to drain your time, this new change can quietly work in your favor, but only if you stay calm enough to let it. And if comparative passages were your strength, you're still fine because that prep wasn't wasted, even if you don't experience one, because you've still been working on tracking viewpoints, recognizing contrasts, and your general awareness of the structure of the passage. And that shows up everywhere across the reading comp section. Now, the second big shift is that LSAT score inflation is real and it's accelerating, meaning it's only getting worse. A 170 does not mean what it used to. Top law schools are reporting record high medians. In the ABA 509 reports that came out a couple of weeks ago, LSAT medians continue to rise nearly 2 points on average per school. And so every top 14 law school is now at a 170 LSAT median or above. And even those outside the T14, the mid-tier schools, the regional schools, their medians are creeping upwards as well. That is the current admissions environment. And so you might be wondering, why is this happening? And there are a couple of major forces at play. The first is that people are just prepping more seriously than ever before, studying harder, studying longer. Secondly, we've got extra time accommodations becoming far more common. LSAC is granting more accommodations for extra time, extra breaks, time and a half, double time, even triple time, being able to take the LSAT over the course of multiple days. We've also got the removal of logic games, making the test easier to approach and easier to study for because there's just less material to study. One additional factor a lot of people don't even think about is that the LSAT's offered more frequently than ever before. It used to be offered only 4 times a year. Now it's offered 8 times a year, so it's easier to retake. There's always another LSAT test date coming up just around the corner. And whether you think any of this is fair doesn't really matter because this is the field that you're competing in. And so if you're targeting competitive schools, first and foremost, you should know that last year's medians are not safe targets because by the time you apply, they're already outdated. Schools are always looking to raise their standing in the rankings, the US News and World Report rankings, of course, and that is directly determined by the LSAT and GPAs of the entering class. We also got to look at scholarship leverage. And the higher your LSAT score, the more scholarship negotiation leverage you're going to have because schools can, of course, afford to be selective. There are more people than ever applying to law school. LSAT and law school applicant numbers are up roughly 50% over the past 2 years. And so law schools, of course, are not increasing class sizes by 50%. So there's more people competing for a limited number of seats. So you got to compare yourself to those applying now in the current applicant pool, given the LSAT score inflation. The third big shift is that the writing sample is about to matter a lot, probably starting this year, if not next year. And almost no one's taking this seriously yet or even talking about it, but there is something new going on LSAT score reports. If you look at your score report now on lsac.org, if you've taken the LSAT before officially, you're going to see something new there. You can see this right now for yourself on lsac.org. There's a new field on the score report labeled the Writing Ability Score. Of course, that is a field that has a big NA on there, not applicable yet. But that field didn't come out of nowhere. LSAC did not include that by accident. They don't add placeholders to official score reports unless something's coming. And what's coming is actually going to solve a real problem for law schools because law schools admissions officers are dealing with their 3 pressures at once. Application essays, first and foremost, are increasingly AI assisted. Even strong essays cannot reliably demonstrate strong writing ability because, of course, the applicant could have been using ChatGPT to help them write the essay. We've also got a lot of LSAT score inflation compressing the top end. Too many people with high scores. We also have accommodations changing how timing differences are interpreted. Basically, law schools won't know whether you got extra time or not, and so they just consider the score as given. And so they need an additional metric. They need a signal that is standardized, it's timed, it's proctored, and something that nobody else could have helped you with. And so the LSAT argumentative writing sample being scored solves a lot of these problems. That's why law schools are pushing for LSAC to score it. They've been pushing for several years now. Even back in 2024, LSAC published a blog post on their website indicating that they are analyzing data from the new argumentative LSAT writing prompt to see its validity and reliability to provide a scored writing assessment in the future. LSAC then last year updated the website indicating that they will still not score the writing sample for this admissions cycle, but this cycle ends in June of 2026. So it is possible that sometime in the next couple of months, LSAC will announce that starting in the second half of 2026, they will begin scoring the writing sample. If they don't score it this year, they will almost certainly score it next year. One additional benefit of scoring the writing sample is to mitigate all of the LSAT cheating that has been going on. For those who are not aware, there have been a lot of LSAT cheating companies, mostly operating out of mainland China, facilitating students cheating on the multiple choice portion of the LSAT. They've had people taking the LSAT for other students. They've been providing released or leaked LSAT exams that were being reused. And so it's possible that scoring the argumentative writing sample would reduce some of the cheating that's going on, or at least give law schools an additional indication of an applicant's writing ability, assuming, of course, that it's harder to cheat on that than to cheat on the multiple choice portion of the LSAT. And so a writing sample that is scored would be extremely valuable to admissions committees. And so even before scoring is formally announced, of course, you don't want to treat the writing sample like a joke. You want to treat it as being real. And so you want to practice timed argumentative writing. You want to prioritize structure over style. You want to take a clear position and defend it. And you want to avoid rambling or hedging both sides. So in other words, you pick a side, you defend it clearly with a structured argument, multiple paragraph breaks, good grammar, good spelling, good punctuation. And this is especially important, of course, if you're taking the LSAT anytime beyond the June 2026 LSAT. There's no downside to preparing for the writing sample, of course. In the short term, if you want to knock out the LSAT before the writing sample change, you can take the LSAT in February, April, or June, guaranteed not to be scored. But of course, there are no guarantees beyond the June LSAT of this year. Now, the fourth big shift that is continuing to have an impact, of course, is the LSAT being administered online. You can take it either in person at a Prometric testing center or remotely from home on your own device, of course. Each format has its own trade-offs. If you take the LSAT at home, you have to rely on your own internet connection. You have to rely on remote proctors who might interrupt you. If you take it in person, you have a more controlled environment, but you also have less flexibility, a less familiar or comfortable environment. But regardless of which format you take, you want to practice exactly how you plan to test, ideally with the same device, with the same setup, same environment. And if you test at home with a remote proctor, you should know that if the proctor interrupts you for any reason, you must ask them to pause the clock. You can't assume they will offer to pause the clock, and of course, every second on the LSAT is precious. Now, given all the recent LSAT changes, the big thing I want to leave you with here is that generic LSAT prep is dead. You can't just do random LSAT questions on your phone or watch scattered YouTube videos and hope that things are going to click. That might have worked 5, 10, 15 years ago, but it does not work in 2026. Given all the changes, the field is more competitive, and so high scorers going forward are going to know exactly which question types cost them time, which passages drain their energy, and which mistakes are repeating under pressure. So rather than just studying more, you want to study with precision. You want to diagnose patterns, isolate your weaknesses, and get down to the root cause instead of the symptoms. The LSAT, of course, has always evolved over the past 20 years. Plenty of changes from the introduction of the comparative passages in June 2007 to the transition of the LSAT from being on paper to on a tablet, from a tablet to a computer, with the removal of logic games, the changes to the reading comprehension section. But what hasn't changed is that high scorers are not necessarily the most talented test takers, but they are the ones who are most adaptable to changing circumstances. And so adaptability really is the true test of the LSAT.